billionaire CEO walks into luxury car dealership and gets turned. What happens next? She fights back. And in doing so, she shakes an entire industry to its core. Betrayal, revenge, a battle for justice. This is the story of Vanessa Harrington, a woman who turned one moment of discrimination into a war that would change everything. But before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Vanessa Harrington sat in her sleek office high above the Chicago skyline. The city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, tall buildings, shimmering lights, endless movement. For some, Chicago was just another financial hub. But for Vanessa, it was a battlefield, one she had fought in for decades. As the CEO of Harrington Motors, one of the most prestigious luxury car brands, a Black woman in an industry dominated by legacy names and old traditions, she had built her company from nothing. She had not inherited wealth or privilege. She had earned her place through hard work, intelligence, and an unshakable belief that everyone, regardless of their background, deserved a seat at the table. But the reality of the world was never that simple. A letter lay open on her mahogany desk. Its words burned into her mind. Dear Harrington Motors, I visited your Westwood luxury auto showroom in Los Angeles last week, excited to purchase one of your vehicles. As a longtime admirer of your brand, I was prepared to invest in a car that represents the pinnacle of craftsmanship and performance. However, my experience was far from what I expected. Despite my financial readiness, I was treated with indifference, even suspicion. The salespeople barely acknowledged me. When they finally did, I was subtly steered away from the higher-end models. Meanwhile, a white customer, dressed no differently than I was offered test drives and a full presentation of options. It pains me to write this because I believed Harrington Motors stood for something greater. If this is how you allow customers to be treated, then perhaps I was wrong. Sincerely, Marcus Evans. Vanessa clenched her jaw as she set the letter down. This wasn't just about one customer's bad experience. She had built her company on the foundation of equality, prestige, and accessibility. A brand where luxury was for all who could afford it, regardless of race. She had personally instilled this vision into every facet of Harrington Motors. And yet, here was proof that somewhere along the chain, her principles were being ignored. She reached for her phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Vanessa? What's going on? It was Michael Carter, her trusted assistant. He had worked with her long enough to read between the lines. I need you to book me a flight to Los Angeles, Vanessa said, leaning back in her chair. There was a slight pause. Are we talking business or personal? I need this to stay quiet, she cut in. No official announcements, no corporate bookings, just a simple personal trip. Michael exhaled. Understood. Where exactly are you headed? Vanessa's grip on the phone tightened. Westwood Luxury Auto Showroom, she said. I need to see something for myself. Michael didn't ask further questions. That was why she trusted him. After hanging up, Vanessa closed the letter and set it aside. There was no turning back now. Her eyes wandered to a framed photograph on the shelf, a younger version of herself standing in front of her very first factory. She remembered what it had taken to get here. The battles, the victories, the silent war of proving herself in an industry that had never made room for people like her. And now she had to prove herself again, not as a CEO, but as a customer. The next morning, as the jet engines roared beneath her, Vanessa gazed out of the plane window. The Chicago skyline blurred below as the aircraft ascended into the sky. By the time she stepped out of her black SUV rental at O'Hare International Airport, she was fully in character. Dressed in a crisp white button-down, dark jeans, and clean sneakers, she blended effortlessly into the casual affluence of Los Angeles. No designer handbag, no jewelry signaling status, nothing that screamed billionaire CEO. Today, she was not Vanessa Harrington, the powerhouse behind a multi-billion-dollar automotive empire. She was simply a potential customer, walking into her own dealership to find out what kind of service she would receive. As she approached Westwood Luxury Auto Showroom, its sleek glass exterior reflected the golden California sun. Inside, cars worth more than most homes were displayed like pieces of fine art. Flawless, gleaming, untouchable. She pulled open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The climate-controlled air hit her immediately, carrying the scent of polished leather and fresh espresso. A handful of employees dressed in impeccably tailored suits were stationed around the showroom. Their conversations with customers were smooth, polished, effortless, designed to cater to the ultra-wealthy. Vanessa glanced around. Not a single face looked like hers. She took a slow breath, squared her shoulders, and made her way to the reception desk. A well-dressed woman with a practiced smile greeted her. "Welcome to Harrington Motors. How can I assist you today?" Vanessa returned the smile. "I'd like to take a look at the Bugatti Chiron Supersport." For a fraction of a second, the receptionist hesitated. It was subtle, but Vanessa caught it, a flicker of doubt as the woman's eyes scanned her plain outfit. Then the receptionist quickly recovered. "Of course," she said. "Let me check with our sales team." And she stepped away, leaving Vanessa waiting. From the corner of her eye, Vanessa caught sight of a tall man in a navy suit approaching. His stride was confident. His sharp jawline and salt and pepper hair were neatly styled. Even before he spoke, she knew who he was. Gregory Stanton, the showroom manager of Westwood Luxury Auto, a man with an impeccable track record of high-end sales, but whose business strategies had raised questions in the past. And if anyone was responsible for fostering an environment of exclusivity, it was him. "I wasn't aware that was necessary." Vanessa Harrington's voice was calm, controlled. Across from her, Gregory Stanton, the showroom manager of Westwood Luxury Auto, smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "For certain models," he said smoothly, "we typically schedule private viewings. These cars are highly exclusive." Vanessa kept her expression neutral. "I understand, but I'd still like to see it." Gregory hesitated. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, discomfort, calculation. Then, with a practiced air of professionalism, he gestured toward a younger employee, a junior salesperson who couldn't have been more than 25. The young man leaned in as Gregory whispered something to him. Whatever was said made his posture stiffen. He turned toward Vanessa, his expression uncomfortable, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, forcing a polite smile. "But at the moment, we don't have that model available for viewing." Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "That's interesting." Just beyond the glass partition, under the perfect glow of showroom lights, the Bugatti Chiron Supersport sat in pristine condition, untouched, flawless, and very much available. Gregory's smile didn't falter. "It's currently reserved for a client," he said smoothly. Vanessa held his gaze. "Then I assume that policy applies to all walk-ins?" "Of course," Gregory responded without hesitation. Before Vanessa could reply, the glass doors swung open behind her. A well-dressed older couple entered, a white man in an expensive navy suit, his wife draped in diamonds. Within seconds, the staff rushed forward to greet them. "Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, welcome!" A senior salesperson practically tripped over himself to assist them. Vanessa watched as the couple was immediately offered champagne, ushered with effortless charm toward the very same Bugatti she had inquired about. Her gaze slid back to Gregory. "That seems like a contradiction." His expression remained cool. "They're long-time clients," he replied. "We already have their financials on file. I'm sure you understand. It saves time." Vanessa didn't say a word. She let his words settle between them. He hadn't just assumed she wasn't a serious buyer. He assumed she wasn't worth the time. She could have corrected him instantly, could have wiped the smug look off his face by dropping her full name, her title, her ownership of the company he worked for. But that wasn't why she was here. Vanessa wasn't here to demand respect based on her status. She was here to see what happened when she had none. Without another word, she stepped aside. She didn't storm out, didn't demand attention. She simply sat down in the lounge area, and she watched. Time passed. Vanessa sat silent and unnoticed. She watched as customer after customer was treated with varying levels of enthusiasm. Some were welcomed warmly, others with polite dismissal. And then a pattern emerged. White customers, regardless of how casually they were dressed, were given immediate and full attention. They were offered brochures, beverages, test drive appointments. Customers of color, they were either ignored or subtly redirected. At one point, a black man entered the showroom. He was well-dressed, confident, clearly successful. Yet within moments, a salesman approached him, not with enthusiasm, but with quiet condescension. Rather than being led toward the luxury models, he was steered toward the lower-end vehicles, suggestions given under the guise of finding the perfect fit. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She didn't need a research team or internal reports to see what was happening. She was watching the evidence unfold, not just bias, but a system that was not accidental but intentional. She glanced at her watch. She had been sitting for nearly an hour, and not once had anyone returned to offer her assistance. She exhaled slowly. She had seen enough. Without a word, Vanessa stood up and walked out of the showroom. As she stepped back into the bright California sun, she felt the weight of what she had uncovered. But there was no anger, only clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't one bad employee. This was a system, and systems could be dismantled. Vanessa sat alone at a corner table in a cafe across the street from the dealership. Her black coffee sat untouched, long gone cold. Through the large glass windows, she had a clear view of the showroom entrance. She hadn't left in frustration. She hadn't caused a scene. That wasn't how she operated. Instead, she watched. The showroom bustled with movement, salespeople gliding across the polished floors, charming customers with practiced ease. And now Vanessa saw what she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just that black and brown customers were treated differently. It was how subtly it happened. She watched how the staff instinctively gravitated towards certain people. Men in tailored suits, women with designer handbags, couples who exuded entitlement. Then came a young black man, dressed sharply, his posture confident. He entered with ease, yet no one approached him. Seconds passed, then a salesperson finally walked over. But instead of welcoming him warmly, their arms were crossed, their stance defensive. From across the street, Vanessa could read the exchange. The salesman wasn't encouraging a sale. He was subtly discouraging one. Vanessa clenched her jaw. Then a white couple walked in, dressed casually, nothing extravagant. And within seconds, they were welcomed with champagne. Vanessa sighed, pressing her fingertips against her coffee cup. This was not an accident. This was a process, a systematic selection where customers weren't just judged, they were filtered. Then the glass doors opened again. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. A young woman stood near the reception desk, her auburn hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, a tablet in hand. Maria Torres, Vanessa had noticed her earlier. She had seen the hesitation in Maria's eyes, and now she watched Maria start to assist a middle-aged black woman at the reception desk, a warm smile on her face. But before she could take even one step forward, Gregory Stanton appeared. He tilted his head slightly, a silent instruction. Maria's posture stiffened, and then she turned away. The black woman stood there alone, unassisted. Moments later, she walked out. Maria hesitated. For the first time, Vanessa saw it in her expression, doubt, regret, an internal war. And that, Vanessa knew, was something she could use. The moment of choice, Maria hesitated. Just for a second. But Naomi saw it, the small flicker of doubt behind her eyes. The pull between duty and conscience. That hesitation was all Naomi needed. Without a word, she placed a $20 bill under her untouched coffee cup, grabbed her bag, and crossed the street. Inside the Westwood Luxury Auto Showroom, the energy was just as polished, just as calculated as before. But Naomi wasn't the same as before. This time, she didn't acknowledge Gregory Stanton. She didn't need to. She walked straight to Maria. The young woman looked up, her fingers tightening around the tablet in her hands. "Hi," Naomi said smoothly. "I was hoping you could help me. I'd like to take a closer look at one of the vehicles." Maria hesitated again. Naomi saw the conflict in her posture, the subtle tension in her shoulders. Maria started, glancing toward the other side of the showroom, where Gregory was deep in conversation with another salesperson. "Which model were you interested in?" Naomi almost smiled. Unlike the others, Maria hadn't dismissed her outright. "The Bugatti Chiron Supersport," Naomi said. Maria's breath hitched slightly. Her fingers tightened around her tablet. "It's right there," Naomi finished, nodding toward the pristine vehicle displayed under the showroom lights. Maria looked down, shifting uncomfortably. "That particular model is reserved," Maria said, her voice quieter now. Naomi remained steady. "I see." Maria exhaled. For the first time, Naomi saw frustration flicker across her face. "You don't have to do this," Naomi said gently. Maria looked up sharply. "Do what?" "Pretend there's a reason I can't see that car when we both know it's available." For a long moment, Maria didn't speak. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if weighing something. Then, just as she seemed ready to say something real, Gregory's voice cut through the air. "Maria." Both women turned. Gregory approached with measured strides, his presence commanding. Naomi met his gaze, unbothered. "Is there a problem here?" Gregory asked, his tone even but pointed. Maria looked between them, suddenly stiff. "No, sir." "Good," Gregory said. Then he turned his attention back to Naomi. "As I mentioned earlier," he said smoothly, "we don't have anything available that would be a good fit for you." The audacity of his words might have made Naomi laugh if the situation weren't so deeply unsettling. Maria's jaw clenched slightly. She looked as though she wanted to say something, but Gregory didn't give her the chance. Instead, he gestured for Maria to follow him, and just like that, the moment passed. Maria turned, but Naomi noticed the way her fingers gripped the tablet tighter, the way her steps weren't entirely steady, a small act of defiance. But small was enough. Naomi didn't push further. She knew when to step back. Instead, as she turned to leave, she reached into her bag, pulled out a business card, and set it carefully on the polished desk. Maria caught the motion out of the corner of her eye, her gaze flickering toward it. Naomi didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But she made sure Maria could read the words printed on the card before she walked away. "If you ever want to talk, call me." As Naomi stepped back into the afternoon sun, she knew she had done enough for now. But the real work was just beginning. Maria sat in the driver's seat of her compact sedan, parked in the dimly lit lot behind the showroom. The engine was off, but she hadn't stepped out yet. Instead, she stared down at the business card resting in her palm, the edges slightly bent from where she had been gripping it too tightly. The name printed on it was simple enough. Naomi Caldwell. No title, no elaborate logo, just a phone number. But Maria knew exactly who she was. She exhaled sharply, tossing the card onto the passenger seat and rubbing her temples. Her shift had been long, but that wasn't what had exhausted her. It was everything else. The weight of what she had seen, what she had been complicit in, and the knowledge that if she made the wrong move, she could lose everything. She glanced up at the rearview mirror, catching her own tired eyes. She had spent the last 2 years convincing herself that she was just following orders, that she had no real choice in the matter. That had worked for a while. But today, after seeing how Gregory had so casually dismissed a woman who should have been treated like any other customer, Maria felt something shift inside her. Keeping quiet wasn't going to make her feel any better. Before she could change her mind, she grabbed the card, pulled out her phone, and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a voice, calm, steady, and completely expecting this call. "This is Naomi. Maria swallowed. "It's me," she said. "Maria, from the showroom." A pause, then Naomi's voice softening slightly. "I'm glad you called." Maria hesitated. "I don't know why I did." "I think you do," Naomi said gently. Maria let out a shaky breath. "Do you want to meet?" Maria glanced out the windshield, checking to see if anyone was watching her. "Yeah," she said, "but somewhere private." "There's a cafe on West 3rd, Naomi said. "Quiet place. Do you know it?" Maria nodded to herself. "Yeah." "I'll be there in 20. Maria ended the call before she could second-guess herself. Naomi arrived first. She chose a table in the back, where the lighting was dim, and the noise from the barista's coffee machine drowned out any low conversation. She stirred a cup of tea absently, though she had no real interest in drinking it. When the door opened, she immediately spotted Maria. The young woman hesitated at the entrance, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning the room. She looked nervous, like someone walking into a situation that could change the course of her life. Naomi had seen that look before. She raised a hand slightly, offering a small nod. Maria saw her, exhaled quickly, then made her way over. She didn't sit down right away. She placed her hands on the back of the chair, as if considering whether this was a mistake. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. Naomi didn't push. "But you are." Maria looked at her for a long moment, then with a resigned sigh, sank into the chair across from her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Naomi let Maria sit with the silence, knowing she would break it first, and she did. "You don't understand how bad it is." Maria's voice was quiet but certain. Naomi knew she was about to hear the truth, a game of exposure. Naomi stood outside the Westwood luxury auto showroom, watching the performance unfold before her eyes. Inside, Michael Reeves was being treated like royalty. Gregory Stanton himself had come out to personally greet him, offering warm handshakes, a guided tour of the showroom, and a private viewing of the very same Bugatti Chiron Supersport that Naomi had been denied. The contrast was undeniable. Less than an hour ago, Naomi, dressed no differently with the same financial capability, had been told the car was unavailable. Now it had suddenly become available, as long as the customer was white. Naomi's stomach tightened, but her face remained unreadable. This wasn't just bias. It wasn't just a bad employee with a superiority complex. This was a system, a deliberate, calculated process of discrimination disguised as exclusivity. And now she had the proof. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text to Daniel. "We have everything we need. Pull the next step." A minute later, her phone vibrated with his response. "On it. Time to make some noise." Michael Reeves sat comfortably in one of the showroom's private lounges, sipping the freshly brewed espresso that had been offered to him. Gregory Stanton sat across from him, speaking in carefully curated sales language, subtly nudging him toward an immediate purchase. "This model is one of a kind," Gregory said smoothly. "Only a handful of them are available in the U.S. You'd be joining a very exclusive group of owners." Michael nodded thoughtfully, glancing toward the gleaming Bugatti displayed under showroom lights. "It's a beautiful machine," he admitted. "But before we go any further, I just have one question." Gregory smiled, ready to close the deal. "Of course, ask away." Michael set his espresso down. Why was this car unavailable when Naomi Caldwell asked to see it? Gregory's smile froze mid-expression. For the first time, he hesitated. I'm not sure I understand the question," Gregory said carefully, though his tone had lost some of its earlier charm. Michael leaned back in his chair, tilting his head slightly. "I think you do," he said, "because Naomi was in this very showroom less than an hour ago, asking to see this exact car, and yet she was told it wasn't available." Gregory's face darkened slightly, but he quickly recovered, offering a tight-lipped smile. "There must have been some misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Perhaps there was a scheduling conflict." Michael cut him off. "There wasn't." Gregory's jaw tensed slightly, but he kept his voice controlled. I assure you, we treat all of our clients with the highest level of professionalism. Michael smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. That's interesting, he mused, pulling out his phone. Because right now, Naomi is standing outside with a team of reporters, and they're about to broadcast this whole conversation live. Gregory's entire demeanor shifted. For the first time, his confidence cracked. What? Michael tapped his screen, and suddenly the sound of Naomi's voice filled the showroom, clear, steady, and impossible to ignore. We are standing outside Westwood Luxury Auto in Beverly Hills, where a blatant case of racial discrimination has just been exposed. Less than an hour ago, I was told this Bugatti Chiron Supersport was unavailable for viewing. Now, a white customer, who requested the same car, is being given full access. This isn't an accident. This is a system designed to filter out customers based on race. The moment the words left the phone, the atmosphere in the showroom shifted sharply. Employees stopped what they were doing, their gazes flickering toward Gregory. Customers whispered among themselves. Their curiosity piqued. Gregory stood abruptly, his face suddenly pale. This is absurd, he stammered. You don't understand how this business works. Michael remained seated, his expression calm and unshaken. Oh, I understand perfectly, he said, locking eyes with him. I understand that in a matter of minutes, this story is going to be all over the news. Gregory's mouth opened, then closed. He could already feel the weight of the disaster crashing down around him. And then, his phone rang. The name on the screen? Corporate headquarters. His fate was sealed. Naomi stood in front of a small gathering of reporters, her voice strong and unwavering as she detailed everything that had happened. This isn't just about one incident, she said, meeting the cameras directly. This is about an industry that thrives on exclusion while hiding behind luxury branding. Maria stood slightly off to the side, her face partially obscured by her hair. She was nervous, but she was there. And that was enough. The cameras turned as Gregory Stanton stormed out of the showroom, his face a mixture of rage and panic. You set this up, he accused, his voice low and venomous. Naomi didn't flinch. I exposed what was already happening, she corrected. You did this to yourself. He opened his mouth, but before he could say another word, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a termination notice. Corporate had seen the footage, the interviews, the evidence, and they weren't going to risk a PR catastrophe. Gregory Stanton, once untouchable, once feared, was finished. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The reporters fired off questions. The cameras rolled, but Naomi didn't need to say anything else. The truth was out, and now the real change could begin. The tipping point, Richard Langford didn't even glance at the caller ID. Langford speaking, he answered, his voice clipped. Richard? The voice on the other end was cold, controlled. Jonathan Fields, a Caldwell Motors board member, and a man who only called when things were serious. We need to talk. Now. Richard straightened, his mind already calculating how much damage control he'd have to do. Of course, he said smoothly. What's the issue? A pause. Then Jonathan's voice dropped lower, edged with quiet fury. We received footage. Richard felt his stomach turn. What footage? Another pause, this one deliberate. Then Jonathan said, a video of you personally denying a black woman access to a Bugatti Chiron Supersport, then turning around and giving a white customer the full VIP treatment. Richard felt his skin go cold. Jonathan, I don't. The sharpness of the word cut him off immediately. Do you have any idea what this means? Jonathan continued. This isn't just bad optics. This is discrimination on camera, Richard. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And if the media gets a hold of it, we're talking full-scale corporate disaster. Richard's grip tightened around his phone. Listen, this is being blown out of proportion. That woman wasn't a serious buyer. I was just filtering customers like we always do. Silence. Then Jonathan let out a slow, measured breath. Filtering. Yes, customer profiling is standard in luxury sales. So you're admitting it? Jonathan cut in. That you profile people based on race? Richard froze. That was a trap, a carefully laid out one, and he had just walked into it. That's not what I meant. Stop talking. Jonathan's voice was lethal now. Corporate has been dealing with enough scrutiny lately. Do you know what happens when the board finds out about this? When our investors get wind of it? The stock will drop. Lawsuits will pile up. You, Richard, have just put all of us at risk. A fresh wave of panic surged through Richard. I can fix this. Jonathan let out a bitter chuckle. No, Richard, you can't. Then in a calm executive voice, he said, effective immediately, you are terminated from your position at Caldwell Motors. We'll be sending you the formal paperwork soon. Do yourself a favor, do not fight this. The line went dead. Richard stood there frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had spent years building his reputation, years cultivating a network of elite clientele, and in less than 24 hours, it had all come crashing down, all because of that woman. Naomi Caldwell. Naomi watched the news spread like wildfire. By the time she finished her morning coffee, the industry had already caught on. Luxury car showroom manager fired amid discrimination allegations. Caldwell Motors under fire for racial bias in high-end sales. CEO Naomi Caldwell responds to industry-wide practices of customer profiling. The headlines were everywhere. And Naomi, she hadn't even had to lift a finger. The truth had done the work for her. She picked up her phone and dialed Daniel. Richard? She asked. Daniel chuckled. Gone. Naomi leaned back in her chair, a small smirk playing on her lips. That's a shame, Daniel snorted. Sure it is. Then he hesitated. But you know this isn't over, right? Naomi's smirk faded into something more calculated, steely. Of course it's not, because Richard might have been the face of the problem, but he wasn't the root. The real fight, that was just beginning. Maria's heart pounded as she made her way across the gleaming showroom floor. Every step felt heavier, each glance from her coworkers filled with silent tension. She could feel it in the air. Something was about to break. Richard Langford stood in his office, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. The blinds were drawn, casting long shadows across the glass table where a single file sat waiting. Maria stepped inside, swallowing hard as the door clicked shut behind her. Sit, Richard ordered. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair across from him. For a moment, he said nothing. He just stared. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he slid the folder toward her. Do you know what this is? He asked. Maria's fingers twitched, but she didn't reach for it. No, sir. Richard tapped the top of the folder. It's an internal report, he said. A report detailing everything that happens inside this showroom. Maria forced herself to keep her breathing steady. I don't understand. Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping. I don't believe in coincidences, Maria. He folded his hands together. And I don't believe for a second that some outsider just happened to get access to a video that could destroy everything we've built here. Maria kept her hands in her lap, clenching them to stop them from shaking. If you're asking if I leaked anything, I'm not asking, Richard cut in smoothly. I'm giving you one chance to come clean. Maria stayed silent. Richard let the silence stretch, his gaze sharp, assessing. Then slowly he exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. You disappoint me. Maria's stomach turned. Richard stood adjusting his cuffs. Here's what's going to happen, he continued. You're going to write a statement saying that these accusations against the showroom are false. You're going to say that you've worked here for a year and have never seen any discrimination. Maria stiffened. And if I don't? She asked quietly. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then tomorrow morning, HR is going to receive a report detailing your performance issues. They'll see a pattern of mistakes, a history of insubordination. Maria's blood ran cold. You'd lie. Richard's smile widened. I don't have to. I just have to be convincing. The weight of his words settled over her like a crushing force. She had known Richard was ruthless, but this was calculated, dangerous. She had two choices: comply or risk everything. Maria forced herself to meet his gaze. I need time to think, she said carefully. Richard nodded as if pleased. Of course, but don't take too long. She pushed back from the table, her legs unsteady as she stood. Richard watched her, his expression one of quiet triumph. He thought he had won. Maria turned and left the office, but as soon as the door shut behind her, she pulled out her phone and dialed. Naomi answered on the first ring. He threatened you. It wasn't a question. Maria exhaled shakily, stepping into the break room to keep her voice low. He wants me to write a statement saying there's no discrimination here. If I don't, he's going to fabricate reasons to get me fired. There was silence on the other end. Then Naomi's voice, calm, steady. You don't have to do this alone. Maria closed her eyes, her chest tightening. I can't lose my job, Naomi. I can't afford to. I know, Naomi said softly, but if you sign that statement, he wins, and he won't stop there. Maria swallowed. She knew that. She had known it the moment Richard slid that folder across the table. If she backed down now, he would own her. She had to make a choice. Maria inhaled deeply, then opened her eyes. What do I do? Jonathan Fields sat in his corner office watching the video again. It was damning. There was no way to spin it, no way to sweep it under the rug. The Beverly Hills showroom had a serious problem. And if he had seen this video, others would too. His phone rang. He picked up without looking at the caller ID. Jonathan? The voice on the other end was low, clipped. We have an issue, the corporate PR director said. The media is getting involved. Jonathan's jaw tightened. How bad? A pause, then, someone inside the showroom is cooperating. Jonathan straightened. A whistleblower? Yes, and I think you already know who it is. Maria. Jonathan ran a hand down his face. He had spent years ensuring that Caldwell Motors stayed ahead of its competitors. He wasn't about to let this sink them. We need to cut this off now, he said. Get me Naomi Caldwell. Naomi sat at the cafe, her phone buzzing with incoming emails. The firestorm had begun. News outlets were picking up the story. Social media was already swarming with outrage over the video. Richard Langford's name was being dragged through the mud. Naomi wasn't surprised when her phone rang. Jonathan Fields, she answered. Naomi, his voice was tight. We need to talk. Naomi leaned back, watching the chaos unfold on her screen. Do we? Jonathan exhaled sharply. Look, I know what you're doing, and I know why. Then you also know I'm not stopping. Silence, then what do you want? Naomi smiled. Accountability, policy changes, and Richard Langford gone publicly. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. She could hear him weighing the options. He didn't want a scandal, but he had no choice. Done. Naomi's smile widened. And one more thing, Jonathan sighed. What now? Naomi's voice was calm, unwavering. Fix the system. Because if I catch Caldwell Motors doing this again, I won't just take down one showroom. A long pause. Then Jonathan said, Understood. The line went dead. Naomi set her phone down, exhaling slowly. It was over. Richard Langford would be publicly fired. Caldwell Motors would be forced to change. And Maria, she had won. Naomi picked up her cup, taking a slow sip of coffee. One battle down. But the war for real change? That was just beginning. Naomi's gaze locked onto Jonathan Fields, the weight of his words settling over the room like a storm cloud. A certain clientele, she repeated slowly, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through steel. And what exactly does that mean, Jonathan? Fields shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. You know what I mean, Naomi. High net worth individuals, people who fit the image of our brand. Our customers expect exclusivity. Naomi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. So you're saying that a black woman, no matter how wealthy or accomplished, doesn't fit that image. Silence. Richard Langford, still seated across from her, stiffened. He was hoping Fields would smooth things over, but instead the boardroom had plunged into an uncomfortable realization. Naomi let the silence stretch before continuing. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice carrying an edge of finality. "Exclusivity is about the quality of our brand, not the color of our customers. If our sales team is making decisions based on appearance rather than financial ability, that isn't catering to clientele, it's discrimination." Jonathan exhaled heavily, rubbing his temple. "Naomi, the last thing we need is bad press." Naomi tapped her fingers on the table. "You're right, but the worst thing we could do right now is pretend this problem doesn't exist." She turned to Richard. "You've been very quiet, Richard." Richard's jaw tightened. "Think we're blowing this out of proportion. There was no malicious intent in my actions. Our showroom operates on a well-established process." Naomi cut him off. "A process you've designed to exclude certain customers." Richard scoffed. "I reject that accusation." Naomi arched an eyebrow, then explained the footage, explained why I, the CEO of this company, was turned away while a white man was given VIP treatment. He opened his mouth but hesitated. There was no good answer. Naomi turned to the board, her next words deliberate, calculated. "This isn't about bad press anymore. It's about whether or not Caldwell Motors actually stands for what it claims to stand for. If we allow this to continue, we aren't just risking a scandal, we're risking the very integrity of this company." The silence was deafening. Naomi could see it in their faces. They knew she was right. Then a voice spoke up from the far end of the table. "I agree with Naomi." All heads turned. It was Eleanor Davenport, another senior board member. She was one of the longest-serving members of Caldwell Motors, a woman who had seen decades of corporate evolution. "I've been in this business long enough to know when a brand is heading for disaster," she continued, "and if we don't take action now, we're heading straight for one." Jonathan Fields exhaled, nodding slightly. "So what do you suggest, Naomi?" he asked finally. Naomi folded her hands together. "First, Richard Langford needs to be removed. Publicly." Richard shot up from his seat. "Now hold on just a damn minute." "No," Naomi interrupted, her voice unwavering. "You've had your chance to explain, and you've only dug yourself deeper. Caldwell Motors cannot afford to have a man like you representing us." The room fell into murmurs as several board members nodded in agreement. Jonathan Fields glanced at Richard, his expression grim. "Naomi has a point." Richard's face turned red. "You can't just throw me out over one misunderstanding." "This isn't a misunderstanding," Naomi countered. "It's a pattern, and it ends today." Jonathan turned to the rest of the board. "All in favor of terminating Richard Langford's employment, effective immediately?" Hands went up one by one. Richard's eyes darted around the room, disbelief settling over him. Then the final hand went up. Jonathan sighed. "Majority vote has passed. Richard, your employment is officially terminated." Richard shot up from his chair, his expression twisted with rage. "You're making a mistake," he barked. "You'll regret this." Naomi leaned back in her chair, her voice cool. "No, Richard, the only mistake was thinking you could get away with it." Security arrived within minutes to escort him out. The moment he disappeared through the doors, Naomi exhaled slowly. One battle was over. Now it was time to rebuild. 1 week later, Naomi sat in her office in Manhattan, staring out over the city skyline. The fallout had been swift. The press had exploded with the story. Caldwell Motors had released a public statement, not only acknowledging the discrimination, but vowing to implement new policies to ensure it never happened again. Naomi had personally overseen those changes, hiring more diverse sales staff, retraining employees, removing outdated, exclusionary practices. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Maria Torres. Naomi smiled before answering. "Maria." Maria's voice was lighter than it had been in weeks. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Naomi leaned back, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. No, Maria, she said. Thank you. You helped change something bigger than either of us. Maria chuckled softly. I guess I didn't I? Naomi smiled, and it's only the beginning. As she ended the call, she glanced back at the city, her resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't just about a car dealership. It was about changing an industry, and she wasn't done yet. Customers were treated. I was denied the opportunity to view a high-end vehicle while a white customer was immediately accommodated. At first, I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, an isolated incident. But as I dug deeper, I found it was far worse than that. This was not the failure of a single showroom or one rogue manager. This was a system designed to exclude customers based on race, a system that has gone unchecked for far too long. The reporters in the room scribbled furiously, some whispering to their colleagues. The weight of Naomi's words was sinking in. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. I took my findings to the board, expecting accountability. Instead, I was met with resistance. Instead of addressing the problem, some chose to protect those responsible. They tried to silence me, to make me seem like the problem rather than the solution. She lifted her gaze, her voice clear, unwavering. But I refused to be silenced. Today, I am calling for an immediate overhaul of Caldwell Motors' sales policies. I am demanding transparency in how customers are treated and a commitment to ensuring that discrimination has no place in this company. I am also calling for the immediate removal of individuals who have fostered and upheld these unethical practices. A wave of camera flashes followed. A journalist from CNN stood up, microphone in hand. Ms. Caldwell, do you believe that this bias is widespread across the entire company, or is it limited to certain locations? Naomi didn't hesitate. This isn't just about one showroom. It's about an industry-wide problem. Luxury brands have long operated on an unspoken system of exclusion, one that determines who belongs and who doesn't. That ends today. Not just at Caldwell Motors, but everywhere. Another reporter stood up. There are rumors that members of the board have actively worked against your efforts, even leaking damaging information about you. Can you confirm this? Naomi's expression didn't change. I will say this, when you try to challenge a broken system, those who benefit from it will always fight back. But I don't intend to back down. A third journalist from the Wall Street Journal leaned forward. If the board refuses to act, what's your next move? Naomi let a slow smile cross her lips. Then I will take this to the shareholders, the customers, and the public. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who truly decide the future of Caldwell Motors. And I have full confidence in where they stand. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Naomi took a step back, pausing just long enough to let her words settle. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked away. As she exited, Daniel was waiting for her, his phone already buzzing with notifications. That was everywhere. Social media, news outlets, even investor circles. They're all watching. Naomi exhaled. Good, now let's see how the board reacts. Less than 24 hours later, the response was swift. The public erupted. Social media was flooded with calls to boycott Caldwell Motors if changes weren't made. Investors began demanding an emergency meeting to address the crisis. And most importantly, customers spoke out. Naomi sat in her office as Daniel read through the flood of emails and comments. We have high-profile figures backing you. Celebrities, business leaders, even a few board members are quietly reaching out, reconsidering their stance. She nodded. And Richard? Daniel smirked. Officially? Silent. Unofficial? He's scrambling. Corporate is in full damage control mode, and they're about 5 steps behind. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID, Jonathan Fields. Naomi let it ring twice before answering. Jonathan? His voice was tight, controlled. Naomi, we need to talk. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Talk or negotiate? A long pause. We're ready to make changes. She smiled. Then I'll see you in the boardroom. The boardroom was silent as Naomi stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding. Let's make this simple, she began. Effective immediately, Caldwell Motors will implement new, non-discriminatory sales policies. Every showroom will undergo an independent audit, and transparency will be our new standard. She turned to Richard, who sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw clenched. And Richard Langford, she continued, his time at Caldwell Motors is officially over. A motion was made. A vote was cast, unanimous. Richard stood, his face red with fury. You think you've won, Naomi. She met his glare with calm certainty. No, Richard, she said smoothly. I know I have. Security escorted him out. As the door shut behind him, Jonathan Fields leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily. I suppose this is the part where I say you were right. Naomi smiled. It's also the part where we start rebuilding. The battle was won, but the war for a better industry had only just begun. The back of the black SUV that had been waiting outside Caldwell Motors headquarters, he realized the truth. He had lost. The power he had wielded for years, the network of allies he had built, gone in an instant. The board had turned against him, the media had buried him, and the company he once controlled was no longer his to manipulate. As the car pulled away from the building, Richard gritted his teeth, his hands clenching into fists. He had underestimated Naomi Caldwell, and it had cost him everything. But he wasn't done yet. Naomi stood in the now empty boardroom, exhaling slowly as the reality of the moment settled in. She had won. Richard was out, but that was only the beginning. The real work was ahead, rebuilding the company, regaining public trust, and ensuring that what had happened would never happen again. Daniel walked in, his phone still buzzing with updates. The press is already running with the story. Investors are reacting. Stocks dipped briefly, but are stabilizing now that Richard's out. Customers are celebrating the decision on social media. Naomi nodded. Good, now we start making real change. She turned to the remaining board members. Effective immediately, Caldwell Motors will implement a full audit of its sales practices. Every showroom will be reviewed, and new diversity and inclusion policies will be enforced at every level of this company. Jonathan Fields sighed, rubbing his temples. You're not giving us much room to argue, are you? Naomi gave a small smile. No, Jonathan, I'm not. He chuckled dryly. All right then, let's get to work. Caldwell Motors was no longer the same company it had been a year ago. The Beverly Hills showroom, once a symbol of exclusivity and discrimination, had been completely overhauled. New leadership, new policies, and a public commitment to diversity had transformed the brand's image. More importantly, customers noticed the difference. Sales had rebounded, higher than ever. The controversy that once threatened to destroy the company had instead led to a movement, one that set a new standard in the luxury car industry. And at the center of it all, Naomi Caldwell. Sitting in her corner office overlooking New York City, Naomi leaned back in her chair, reflecting on the past year. She had taken on an entire industry in one. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria Torres. I just saw the new showroom policies. You did it. Naomi smiled, typing a quick response. No, we did. She set the phone down, watching as the city stretched out before her. There were still battles to fight, still systems to change. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going anywhere. Richard Langford sat in the dimly lit silence of his Manhattan penthouse, staring blankly at the ticker running across the news channels. The words burned into his mind, each one a cruel reminder of his downfall. Disgraced executive Richard Langford ousted amid scandal. Caldwell Motors fires former showroom director over discriminatory practices. Industry reckoning begins, a turning point for luxury brands. Every major news outlet was covering the same story, his story, but not in the way he had once envisioned. His name, once synonymous with prestige and influence, was now a cautionary tale, a symbol of the old guard being dismantled. He picked up his phone, scrolling through the contacts that had once been his lifeline: industry executives, investors, high-powered attorneys. But each call he made was either sent to voicemail or met with a cold dismissal. No one wanted to be associated with him. He had built his career on exclusivity, on deciding who was worthy and who wasn't. And now, he was the one being shut out. Richard clenched his jaw and reached for the half-empty whiskey glass on his desk, but his hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. His world, the empire he had crafted, the power he had hoarded, was gone, and Naomi Caldwell had taken it from him. At Caldwell Motors headquarters in New York, a different kind of meeting was taking place. One that wasn't about damage control, but about what came next. Naomi Caldwell stood at the podium in a packed conference room, facing investors, employees, in a sea of reporters, all waiting to hear what the future of the company would be. She took a deep breath, her hands steady as she looked into the cameras, knowing that today she wasn't just addressing a corporation, she was addressing an entire industry. Today, she began, we turned the page. A hush fell over the room. The past few weeks have revealed serious flaws in our company's culture. It is clear that systemic biases have impacted how we serve our customers. And for that, Matt, we take full responsibility. She let the words sink in before continuing. But accountability is only the first step. Real change must happen, and it starts today. Behind her, the large screen lit up, displaying the company's new policies, concrete steps, not just empty promises, mandatory bias training for all employees, zero tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, a dedicated oversight team to investigate customer treatment, new leadership at key showroom locations. Naomi turned back to the audience. We are not just changing our policies, we are changing our culture. The room remained silent, absorbing the weight of her words. And this is bigger than Caldwell Motors. This is about the entire luxury auto industry. It is about ensuring that every customer, regardless of race, background, or appearance, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. She paused, then delivered the final blow. We are setting a new standard, and we challenge every other luxury brand to do the same. The room erupted in applause. Naomi Caldwell had just changed the game. After the press conference, Naomi returned to her office where Maria Torres was waiting. Maria still wasn't used to the attention that had come with blowing the whistle on Richard Langford. Even now, her hands fidgeted as Naomi approached. Naomi gave her a reassuring smile. You did something brave, she said, and I know that wasn't easy. Maria exhaled, nodding. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Naomi studied her for a moment before speaking again. We need people like you, people who aren't afraid to speak up when something is wrong. Maria's eyes widened as Naomi continued. I'd like to offer you a new position. I want you to help oversee the new training and reform initiatives. Help us rebuild. Make sure this never happens again. Maria's breath caught. Are you serious? Naomi nodded. Maria was silent for a long moment, stunned. Then she straightened her posture and met Naomi's gaze. I won't let you down. Naomi smiled. I know you won't. The Caldwell Motors showroom in Beverly Hills was unrecognizable compared to a year ago. Gone was the cold, unwelcoming atmosphere. Instead, a new energy filled the space, built on fairness, inclusion, and integrity. New employees had been hired, and existing staff had undergone rigorous training to ensure equal treatment for every customer. A new general manager, David Holloway, had been handpicked by Naomi to lead the change. A man with a history of advocating for diversity and fairness in high-end retail. The results? Customers noticed the difference. It actually feels like they want me here, a black customer said as he test drove a Bentley. Last time I was here, I felt invisible. Now they're actually listening to what I want, another added, and the numbers didn't lie. Sales, which had plummeted during the scandal, were surging back up. Caldwell Motors, once a cautionary tale, had become an example of what corporate accountability could look like. And at the center of it all, Naomi Caldwell. Late that night, Naomi stood in her office, gazing at the New York skyline. She had won the battle, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Discrimination in business didn't disappear overnight. There would always be new challenges, new boardrooms resistant to change, new Richard Langfords waiting in the shadows. But now she had proven that the system could be challenged. She had shown the world that change wasn't just possible, it was necessary. A small smile touched her lips. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Naomi Caldwell's story wasn't just about exposing a corrupt executive or winning a corporate power struggle. It was a reminder that real change doesn't happen by staying silent, that justice is only won when people refuse to accept the way things are. She could have walked away, but instead she fought. And because of that, an industry changed forever. Naomi Caldwell's journey is more than just a corporate battle. It is a powerful testament to the impact of courage, persistence, and accountability. Through her fight against discrimination in the luxury automotive industry, she proved that challenging the status quo is never easy, but it is necessary. Her story teaches us several invaluable lessons about leadership, integrity, and the power of standing up for what is right. One of the most important takeaways from Naomi's experience is that real change begins when people refuse to accept injustice as the norm. Discrimination, whether in business, politics, or daily life, persists because it is often ignored or excused. Naomi could have walked away after experiencing racism at her own company's showroom. She could have demanded service by leveraging her position as CEO, correcting only her personal experience while allowing the larger issue to remain unchecked. But instead, she made the courageous choice to expose the system, ensuring that no other customer, regardless of their race or background, would have to endure the same treatment. She understood that change doesn't come from silence. It comes from speaking up, even when it's difficult. Another vital lesson from Naomi's fight is that powerful institutions will always resist accountability. When she brought evidence of discrimination to the Caldwell Motors board, they initially refused to act. Instead of addressing the issue, they attempted to protect the company's reputation and maintain the exclusivity that had defined their brand for decades. Richard Langford, the executive responsible for fostering a toxic culture, fought back aggressively, using media manipulation and corporate politics to discredit Naomi. This illustrates a harsh reality. When you challenge deeply ingrained systems of inequality, those who benefit from them will do everything in their power to maintain control. But Naomi's perseverance proved that even the most rigid structures can be broken when enough pressure is applied. Her victory also highlights the importance of using one's influence to uplift others. She did not fight this battle alone. Her success was possible because of people like Maria Torres, an employee who risked her career to expose the truth. Instead of simply punishing those responsible, Naomi focused on long-term solutions, implementing policies that ensured fairness in customer treatment. She even gave Maria a leadership role in overseeing reforms, showing that true leadership isn't just about making changes. It's about empowering others to be part of the solution. Perhaps the most profound lesson from Naomi's story is that the fight for justice never truly ends. Even after Richard Langford was removed and Caldwell Motors restructured, she knew that there would always be more battles to fight. Discrimination and exclusion exist in many forms, and industries that rely on exclusivity often resist inclusivity. But Naomi proved that one person's decision to stand up can create ripples of change that transform an entire system. Her story reminds us that while the road to justice is long, it is always worth walking, especially for those who come after us. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the fight for fairness and equality, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends and family, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think about Naomi Caldwell's journey? Have you ever faced or witnessed similar challenges? Let's keep the conversation going. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Your support helps us continue sharing real, impactful narratives that inspire change. Thank you for watching.